It was our wedding anniversary, and the three of us, my husband, our daughter, and I, gathered around the table, savoring a meal that was both delicious and filled with warmth. As we finished eating, my husband stood up, a small, excited smile tugging at his lips. "I picked up a special wine for tonight," he said, his voice carrying a touch of anticipation. "I hope you'll enjoy it." "That's so thoughtful of you," I replied, smiling back at him. "Let me grab the wine opener from the kitchen." He nodded and got up to fetch it. His movements seemed almost rehearsed, as if he had planned this moment in advance. Moments later, he returned with a glass of wine, handing it to me with a flourish. "Here you go," he said, eyes gleaming with something I couldn't quite place. "Give it a try." "Thank you," I responded, raising the glass to my lips. "Cheers to us." But as soon as the wine touched my tongue, I felt a sharp burning sensation. My throat constricted, and before I could comprehend what was happening, I began choking. I gasped for air, the room spinning as panic gripped me. "I can't breathe," I cried out, collapsing to the floor, clutching my throat in desperation. Our 7-year-old daughter, Holly, witnessed my distress, and her eyes widened in terror. "Daddy, something's wrong with Mommy. We need to call an ambulance," she shouted, her voice trembling with fear. But my husband, Kenny, remained eerily silent. He stood there, watching me with a cold, emotionless expression as I struggled to breathe. Holly, sobbing uncontrollably, clung to my clothes, her tiny body shaking with panic. Once my body went still, Kenny calmly pushed her aside, and without a word, walked out of the house. The sound of the front door clicking shut reverberated through the room. I quickly sat up, a jolt of realization hitting me as I tried to process the horrifying reality of the situation. "My name is Mary. I'm 34 years old, a composer with a decent reputation in the music industry. Some of my earlier work even became the theme song for a popular TV series, allowing me to live comfortably. I met Kenny at a wedding after party, where we bonded over our shared love of alcohol. His recklessness was once charming, his spontaneity a refreshing change to the routine of my life. We started dating, going out for drinks on weekends, and eventually got married. A few years later, we were blessed with a daughter named Holly, completing our family. After our marriage, I quickly realized that Kenny wasn't interested in household chores or caring for Holly. Even with her arrival, he continued his carefree lifestyle, completely oblivious to the mounting responsibilities in my life. One evening, as Holly cried in her crib, I heard him from the kitchen. "Hey Mary, Holly's crying. I'm cooking. Can you take care of her?" he called out. "It's a hassle," I replied. "She might be more comfortable with you." But he refused. "Why should I? I'm already balancing work and household chores. You take care of her." With a resigned sigh, I left the stove to attend to Holly. I turned to him in frustration. "Kenny, can you please help more around the house and with Holly? Managing everything on my own is overwhelming." He shrugged nonchalantly. "Why don't you just hire a housekeeper or a babysitter?" "That's not the point," I shot back, my frustration mounting. "I don't want to waste money on that, especially with Holly's future in mind. We agreed to live a modest middle-class lifestyle, didn't we?" "Did we?" he retorted, clearly uninterested. "Anyway, I'm always exhausted from work. You handle everything else." Despite numerous attempts to communicate, Kenny's indifference remained. I found myself shouldering the burden of both household chores and child care. As the years passed, Holly grew, and by the time she was about to start elementary school, my in-laws planned a celebratory dinner for her. Their home was an hour's drive away, and we had always enjoyed a good relationship with them. My father-in-law, a stern but fair man, had always treated me kindly, while my mother-in-law was warm and charming. At the dinner table, Holly beamed with pride as she showed off her new backpack and lunchbox. "Thank you, Grandpa and Grandma," she said, her eyes sparkling with joy. My father-in-law smiled and poured me a drink. "Mary, seeing Holly's growth is a testament to your hard work." I blushed slightly. "Well, she's such a good girl. She helps me out a lot." "That's wonderful," my mother-in-law added, smiling warmly. "I hear you've been working on the theme song for the next movie, Mary?" "Yes, the song is ready," I replied, feeling a bit of pride. "The movie is scheduled for release next month." "You have a wonderful wife, Kenny," my father-in-law remarked. You must be very proud. But Kenny's expression remained unchanged. He didn't seem pleased at all. She earns so much, yet I don't get to enjoy any of it, Kenny blurted out, to the surprise of both my in-laws and me. What do you mean? We all asked in unison, taken aback by his comment. He continued, people call her a prominent composer, so I expected a better lifestyle. She never gives me any pocket money and refuses to improve our quality of life. She's stubborn and stingy. Hold on, Kenny, my mother-in-law interjected. You both live in a beautiful apartment. Did Mary buy that? Yes, my father-in-law agreed. And isn't it a man's role to support the family, rather than rely on Mary? Have you considered working harder to increase your income? Yeah, got it. Kenny grumbled, clearly uninterested in the conversation. And that was the end of it. I felt a mix of irritation towards him, and a sense of gratitude toward my in-laws for their support. Soon after, Kenny began coming home late, claiming it was due to work. At first, I wasn't concerned, as his job often required overtime. But then, even on his days off, he was away from home, always glued to his phone when he was there. His interactions with Holly and me grew more distant. One Sunday morning, Holly had planned a special outing with him. She gently shook him awake. Dad, it's already 9 o'clock. Remember, today was supposed to be our outing day. Kenny suddenly sat up, his face twisted in irritation. Without a word, he roughly pushed her aside. Dad? Holly asked, stunned, her eyes welling with tears. What's going on? What's going on? I demanded, my voice rising. How could you push her like that? Kenny, now fully awake, snapped. I have other things to do today. I needed to sleep longer. Did you forget? Leave me alone. With that, he roughly ushered us out of the bedroom and began preparing himself with meticulous care before leaving the house. His behavior was completely unforgivable, especially toward Holly. As I comforted her, my doubts about Kenny deepened. A month later, after a particularly exhausting day at work, I collapsed into bed after tucking Holly in. But in the middle of the night, I woke up feeling thirsty. It was late in the night when I went to the kitchen for a drink, my mind still reeling from everything that had happened. As I stood there, I suddenly heard Kenny's voice, lively and upbeat, drifting from the living room. He was on the phone with someone. Curiosity gripped me, and I couldn't help but eavesdrop. Then, I heard something that made my blood run cold. Beth, you're the only one I love. I froze. This was no ordinary conversation. Kenny was speaking to another woman. My heart raced as I silently continued to listen, my thoughts spiraling. Just as I was about to confront him, I overheard something even more chilling. Start planning for the anniversary in 3 days. Everything will go according to plan, Kenny said with eerie calmness. My chest tightened as I realized what was happening. Kenny wasn't just cheating on me. He was plotting something much darker. The pieces of his plan began to fall into place, and I felt a deep, overwhelming dread. Without making a sound, I slipped my phone back into my pocket and quietly retreated to our bedroom, careful not to alert Kenny to my presence. When he returned later, he fell into a deep sleep beside me, but my eyes remained wide open. I could barely process the magnitude of what I had just heard. The next morning, as Kenny left for work, I found myself gathering my thoughts. Initially, I felt devastated, but that quickly gave way to a seething rage. I wasn't going to let this go. I left the house and headed to an electronics store, buying several security cameras. I installed them throughout the house, setting everything in place for what was to come. I knew I had to be prepared. 3 days later, on our wedding anniversary, Kenny's behavior seemed oddly warm and affectionate. Mary, today is a special day, he said with a smile that almost seemed genuine. Yes, it is, I replied, keeping my voice steady. I'm glad you remembered. I know I've been coming home late lately. I'm sorry about that, he continued, feigning regret. But today I'll be home early. Let's celebrate our wedding anniversary. I'm really looking forward to it. I nodded, though I couldn't shake the knot of tension in my stomach. As he left for work, I calmly continued my preparations. By 6 p.m., the dinner was ready, and I awaited his return. When he arrived, I greeted him with a smile, masking the turmoil inside me. How was your day, Kenny? I asked. Dad, you're home early, Holly exclaimed, clearly delighted to see her father. My heart ached as I watched her joy. She had no idea what was really happening. I smiled weakly at her, but my thoughts were elsewhere. "I'm sorry, Holly," I whispered under my breath. Kenny, noticing the elaborate spread before him, let out an impressed whistle. "Wow, this looks amazing. Shall we eat?" he said, his tone casual as if everything were normal. We gathered around the table, enjoying the meal together, but every bite felt like a bitter reminder of the life I thought I knew. As we finished, Kenny reached for something he had set aside. "I bought a special wine for our anniversary. I think you'll really like it," he said, his voice smooth and practiced. "That's very thoughtful of you," I replied, trying to stay composed. "I'll go ahead and open it. Is the wine opener in the kitchen?" He nodded, almost robotically, as he stood to fetch it. When he returned, he poured the wine into my glass with an exaggerated flourish. "Here, give it a try," he said, handing me the glass. I smiled faintly. "Cheers." But as soon as the wine hit my lips, panic surged through me. "I can't breathe," I gasped, clutching my throat. I collapsed to the floor, struggling for air. Holly screamed, her voice shrill with fear. "Daddy, something's wrong with Mommy. Call an ambulance." Her tiny hands tugged desperately at Kenny, who stood there, motionless and cold, watching my suffering. Our daughter, tears streaming down her face, was in complete hysterics. I could barely focus on her as the darkness began to close in. Then it happened. Kenny pushed Holly aside, as though she were a mere inconvenience, and without a word, he turned and left the house. The door slammed behind him, and in that instant, something inside me snapped. I had seen enough. I knew what was really happening. Holly, still sobbing uncontrollably, clung to me as I slowly regained my composure. "Holly," I whispered softly, my voice trembling. "It was just a prank, sweetheart. A very cruel one. I never meant to scare you like that. But I thought I lost you," she sobbed, clutching me tightly. In the shadows, a few onlookers watched, bewildered by the scene unfolding. When Kenny returned later that night, he seemed indifferent to what had just transpired. "Is Holly asleep?" he asked, his tone clipped and annoyed as he entered. I stayed hidden in the dark, waiting for the moment of reckoning. As I flicked on the light, Kenny's face went pale. He clearly wasn't prepared for my sudden appearance. "Why are you still here?" he demanded, his voice betraying his disbelief. I met his gaze, my expression calm and unyielding. "It was all an act," I said, my voice steady. "I overheard your plan." Kenny's eyes widened as the reality of my knowledge sank in. His face flushed with fury as I recounted the conversation I had overheard, word for word. Everything was carefully planned, wasn't it? Poison, a staged suicide, and the inheritance that would come with my death. His face twisted in anger. "You eavesdropped. That's despicable," he shouted, his fists clenched in rage. But I remained unflinching. "You're the one who foolishly discussed your plan at home," I replied coolly, knowing that I had already won. Kenny's eyes darted around in panic as he grabbed my purse and pulled out a small, unfamiliar bottle. "Now that you know, there's no choice but to make you drink this," he said, his voice trembling with rage. I stood firm, refusing to back down. "There's still time to stop," I pleaded, but I knew he wouldn't listen. Just then, my in-laws appeared in the doorway, their faces stern and resolute. "Why are you two here?" Kenny demanded, his voice quivering with surprise. "We've been here since this evening," my father-in-law said coldly, pointing to the surveillance camera mounted in the corner. "We were monitoring the feed from another room. We saw everything. From when you poured the contents of that bottle into the glass, to when you hid it in Mary's bag." Kenny's face drained of color. He was cornered. "That's not all," I said, pulling out my phone. I played the audio recording of our conversation, the entire damning exchange. The evidence was irrefutable. With the video footage, the recording, and the wine as evidence, the police would have no problem making a case. Kenny collapsed to his knees, tears welling up in his eyes as he begged for mercy. "Dad, Mom, please don't let them arrest me. I don't want to be a criminal. I'll change. I promise." But my father-in-law, his face hard as stone, was unforgiving. "You've crossed a line, Kenny. Not only did you plan to hurt Mary, but you also traumatized Holly. I can't even look at you as my son anymore." Without a word, my in-laws revealed that they had already reported him to the police. The sound of sirens grew louder as Kenny stumbled toward me, his hands shaking with desperation. "Please forgive me, Mary," he pleaded. "If you don't press charges, I won't be arrested. Let's start over. We can be a family again." But I couldn't forgive him. Not after everything he had done, especially after trying to take my life. "There's no way I could ever forgive you," I said firmly. Before he could speak again, the police arrived. Kenny and his mistress were both arrested and sentenced to prison. The authorities revealed that his mistress, a pharmacology student, had stolen the poison from her university, intending to use her knowledge to carry out the plan. I filed a lawsuit against her, and her parents quickly settled. As for Kenny, we finalized our divorce, and he was left to serve his sentence alone. I've had no contact with him or his parents since. They've made it clear that once Kenny is released, they'll support him, but from a distance. They'll help him relocate far away from me and Holly. Holly and I moved to a peaceful, quiet place. When she asked about her father, I told her simply, "He's working far away now." Holly's reply broke my heart, yet gave me a sense of relief. "He doesn't have to come back." I smiled at her, though it was laced with bitterness. Our future together, away from the darkness of the past, was all that mattered now. I was determined to create a life of peace and happiness for the two of us. One that was free from fear and betrayal.